Should you make a Warhammer the Old World army right now? That is the question that I am personally asking in my own hobby life. And you know what? I really can't decide. Now, you might be sitting out there, you might already have your old armies, or you might play a different game like Kings of War or something like that. Fair enough, if you already have an army, this question isn't really for you, but I would be interested in your opinion nonetheless. Now, you might even be wondering, why is this even a question? If you want to do it, do it. Well, it's just a case about time and effort and money. So one thing that we do know, that the Warhammer the Old World is going to be the same scale. It's going to be 28mm, right? So if you get any kind of like for like models, they're very likely going to be useful. In fact, Games Workshop have said they want you to be able to use your old models. That sort of implies that if you have a specific unit of like infantry or something like that, they're going to have a similar kind of unit in the new game. So you should be able to use your old stuff. Now you might be like, well, then I'm just going to go make myself an Empire army. Fair enough. However, the reason that I am not doing that is relatively simple. Games Workshop are going to release some new models, and Games Workshop models, I believe, are truly fantastic. It seems to me that the level of detail and quality has just been getting better over the years, and I can't imagine a world coming out where they release a new starter box or boxes for their armies, and I look at them and I go, I don't really like that. There's been very little when it comes to Games Workshop that I think, oh, I'm actually not a big fan of that. Wasn't generally a big fan of the new Warcry starter box, but even that I can appreciate the quality, if that makes sense. So I know that when Games Workshop release something for my favorite armies or armies that I'm interested in, it's going to be really hard not to just buy that stuff. So why would I buy the old stuff, paint it all up, make it, and then maybe just buy the new stuff to replace it? Sure, you could have the combination of the two and stuff like that, but I'm probably just going to want more of the new stuff. And I think really the two factions that I'm personally interested in the most, probably Empire and Dark Elves, those models still exist as like Cities of Sigmar, I believe. I could go ahead and make a relatively decent 2000 point army perhaps using Games Workshop stuff, but it's very, very likely that the core set is going to be Empire and something else, right? And there's no way they're not going to be doing some new models, if not a completely new set of models. So I know that I'm going to want them. It's already a given. So a bit of me thinks that any army that I'm truly passionate about, or that I might actually want to build like through the official Games Workshop models, I gave you two, but there's probably an extra 2 or 3 that I could add to that list. I probably shouldn't make that army now, because effectively I might just be throwing my money away, paying for models that I'm then going to replace quite quickly. Which, if you enjoy the hobby, crack on, but I'm personally about the game generally. But I also know that I'm going to like cool models. Like, I want the cool models, I'm just not then going to spend ages painting them up and, you know, making sure they're all perfect or anything like that, which I realise is a little bit contradictory, but hell, it's my life, I'll do what I like. So for me, I've ruled out the idea of making an army based on the faction that I actually want to play, because I think Games Workshop are going to do some really, really nice stuff, and I know that I'm going to want it, right? So then what am I left with? Well, I'm left with the sort of like B tier factions, or even C tier factions. And I'm saying B tier and C tier just in my own personal perception of like how I'm interested in that faction, not in terms of competitiveness and not in terms of some sort of general consensus of what faction is good or bad kind of thing. Like, one faction that I always sort of like the look of, but I would probably never make generally, would be something like the Demons of Chaos. Now, they might be your favourite army, fair enough, but to me they've always been sort of B or C tier just in terms of the way I view them, aesthetically I mean. So I may end up making that army just simply so I can sort of have one ready to go when the game comes out. I already have a second faction or a third or fourth faction, you know what I mean? Which, to be fair, I need to be real with myself, it's very unlikely that I'm going to have more than 2 or 3 armies. It's a lot of work and a lot of money, and I'm not into the hobby that much. I'll probably try and stick with 1 or 2, which then goes back to the original point of then, if you're going to have Dark Elves and Empire, why are you going to make a third? Great question. Again, it's just because my hands at the minute are waiting. I'm waiting for the new models, therefore I might as well try and make something. So anyway, what I'm thinking about doing is picking a faction that I wouldn't put in my S tier armies, you know, my Empire and Dark Elves, which could be any factions to you. And then once I've picked those factions, maybe I go ahead and make an army for those factions. Then there's another question. What models should you use? Now, this would apply even if you want to make your A tier or S tier armies, right? What models would you use now? Yes, you can go ahead and use the Games Workshop stuff. That will probably get replaced. Or, let's face it, there's 2 other main options. One of them is just an alternative seller. So Mantic is obviously a good example of this. I believe they have like a Demons of Chaos army, for example, probably called Elements of something, but you know, it's got everything I think you would need. They obviously have Tomb Kings now, they're with the Dust, whatever they're called. Mantic are just a very solid option. And there's probably other sellers that I just, you know, don't know off the top of my head. But you could go ahead and do that, paint them up, be ready for it, you know, you're ready. You've got an army ready to go when the game comes live. There's the second option, which is more like an elephant in the room, I guess, at these days if you're at Games Workshop headquarters, and that is 3D printing. Now, for my money, 3D printing is always a bit weird. There are some companies armies or some like Patreon people where effectively you pay like $100 and then you can print an entire army off whatever you like, which really the cost ratio is probably not that good instead of just buying an army if you had to buy the 3D printer and then pay for the STLs, right? But I already have the 3D printer. It's not an amazing 3D printer, but I'm sure it would work well enough. It's a resin one, so it should be okay. So I could do that. I could pay for, you know, a faction bundle. I think one-page rules are classic ones, for example. I think they're about $100, not 100% sure off the top of my head. I could pay for that, maybe like Lizard Men or whatever. Go ahead, print them up, have as much as I like. Yeah, sure, could do that. And then the other option is basically to have like free models. Now, I'm not saying everything should be free. Obviously, the people who are designing these models need to be paid for their work, and that's understandable and reasonable. But if you are going with free models, generally, and this probably exists somewhere, and if you know where, you can always put in the description below for me, in the comments below, not the description. I write the description. But generally, the free models are a bit more like haphazard. It's more like one unit here or something like that. It's generally not a full army, even though it probably does exist. So it becomes a bit questionable. If you then do buy the STL files, I then have to print it all, cure it all, wash it all, you know, it all becomes a bit of a faff. It takes quite a few hours. So that's one option, and if you're interested in 3D printing, do that. I'm personally thinking about just buying it through Mantic, if I'm honest. Yes, I have to assemble the miniatures and stuff like that, but I don't know, in my head it's a bit easier to do that than 3D print. However, 3D printing, if you already have the 3D printer, is probably the cheaper option. So I'm a little bit torn, but I think those are the two options for me right now, is to buy like a third-party army of a faction that I'm not too bothered about, or to 3D print a faction that I'm not too bothered about. Both seem reasonably okay, and I think that's something I'm going to do. I might even do both and sort of compare and contrast. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. But yeah, the dilemma really for me is that I know Games Workshop are going to make stuff that I want. It'll be a hype train, and it'll be a very, very big hype train. And I'm already on board. I'm already on this hype train before it's even set off. I've been at the train station for a couple of years. You know what I mean? I'm already there. I'll be like the naked guy at the front of the train, arms open like I'm on bloody Titanic or something like that. Hopefully the game doesn't sing like the Titanic, but you know, that's a separate question, I guess. So really, to answer the question, should you make an army now? It really depends on how you feel. How would you feel if you decided to make an army that then got loads of brand new shiny toys the minute the game came out? Would you be like, oh, I want them? And there's a question there that, like, let's take Empire for example. Will the new Empire models look reasonably okay with the old Empire models? I don't know, probably, maybe, but it's hard to be sure. But for me, it's more like, well, I'm gonna want the new stuff. So if you want the new stuff, maybe you should do what I'm doing and pick an army that you're not too bothered about and try and make that, either 3D printing it or buying it from, well, Games Workshop or Mantic or any of the other sellers. However, if you already have an army, then you're probably okay, you know, just don't worry about it, have fun. Let me know what you're gonna do. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think I should 3D print it, or do you think I should buy it, and why? Let me know. What you should definitely do though is have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.